Walking into a jewelry store you've poured your heart and soul into building for 15 years, and a woman in a wine-red dress dripping in fake diamonds, her cleavage spilling out as she slams a jewelry box on your counter, demanding a full refund for a necklace she claims is defective. Except you've never seen that necklace before in your life, and when you politely tell her it's not from your store, she threatens to destroy your reputation, calls the police, and accuses you of fraud. But what she doesn't know is that you have security footage, receipts, and a detective who's about to expose the most elaborate return scam you've ever witnessed. My name is Maria Santos, I'm 43 years old, and I own Santos Fine Jewelry, a small family business in an upscale suburban shopping district that my mother and I built from absolutely nothing after immigrating to this country 20 years ago with just our skills, our faith, and a dream of creating something beautiful that would last. Every piece in my store tells a story. The engagement rings that start new chapters, the anniversary gifts that celebrate enduring love. The graduation presents that honor achievement, and I take immense pride in the quality and authenticity of everything I sell, which is why when Vivian Ashford walked through my door on that Tuesday afternoon in late May, I knew immediately something was wrong. It was around 2:30 p.m. The store was quiet with just one other customer browsing, and I heard the door chime followed by the clicking of expensive heels and this woman's voice before I even saw her, loud, entitled, already complaining to someone on her phone about having to deal with incompetent small business owners. I looked up from helping Mrs. Chen select a bracelet for her daughter, and there she was. Vivian Ashford, though I didn't know her name yet. This chubby woman in her early 50s, maybe 5'4" and well over 200 pounds, squeezed into a wine-red wrap dress cut so low her cleavage was practically the first thing you noticed. Short burgundy-dyed hair with blonde streaks perfectly styled and sprayed into place, face caked with makeup including lipstick that matched her dress, enormous fake diamond earrings that caught every light, multiple oversized rings on her fingers that were clearly costume jewelry, gold bangles jangling on her wrists, designer knockoff sunglasses with rhinestones pushed up on her head, and she was carrying this huge beige fake designer bag with gold chains that probably cost more than it should have for something so obviously counterfeit. She marched straight past Mrs. Chen without even an excuse me, positioned herself at my main counter like she owned the place, and before I could even greet her, she slammed down a black jewelry box and announced in this theatrical voice, "I need to return this. It's defective and I expect a full refund immediately. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Rayan Review 2.0 for more real emotional HOA stories." I excused myself from Mrs. Chen, walked over to the counter, and opened the jewelry box to find a necklace. A silver chain with what appeared to be diamonds and sapphires in an ornate setting, and my first thought was that it was beautiful, and my second thought was that I had absolutely never seen this piece before in my entire life. I've been in the jewelry business for 15 years. I know every single item that's come through my store. I personally select most of my inventory, and this necklace was not mine, had never been mine, and honestly didn't even match the style or quality level of pieces I typically carry. I looked up at Vivian and said politely, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this necklace isn't from our store. I don't recognize this piece and I don't have any record of selling it." And the transformation on her face was instantaneous. She went from impatient to furious in a heartbeat, her round face turning red, her eyes narrowing behind all that eyeliner. And she raised her voice loud enough that Mrs. Chen and my employee Jessica both turned to look. "Excuse me?" Vivian practically shouted, her jewelry jangling as she gestured dramatically. "I bought this here 3 weeks ago. I have the receipt somewhere, and you're telling me you don't remember. What kind of business are you running here?" I maintained my calm. You learn to do that when you work with customers. And I explained that I keep meticulous records of every sale, that I'd be happy to look up any transaction by date or credit card or customer name, but that I was certain this particular necklace had never been sold from Santos Fine Jewelry. Vivian's response was to dig through her enormous fake designer bag, pulling out receipts, makeup, her phone, keys, a wallet, all while muttering loudly about incompetent shopkeepers, and small businesses that don't deserve to survive. And finally, she triumphantly pulled out a crumpled receipt and slapped it on the counter, saying, "There, proof." I picked up the receipt, smoothed it out, and immediately saw the problem. It was from a completely different jewelry store, a chain retailer called Diamond Gallery, located in a mall across town, dated 3 weeks prior for a necklace matching the description of the one in the box, purchased for $847. I looked at Vivian and said as gently as possible, "Ma'am, this receipt is from Diamond Gallery, not from my store, Santos Fine Jewelry. See? It says so right here at the top." And I pointed to the store name clearly printed on the receipt. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but you could feel the tension building. And then Vivian did something I'll never forget. Instead of acknowledging her mistake, instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a shred of humility, she doubled down and got aggressive. She grabbed the receipt back, barely glanced at it, and then looked me straight in the eye and said, "That's impossible. I specifically remember buying this here. Your memory must be wrong, and I demand to speak to the owner." And when I told her I was the owner, her expression shifted to this condescending smirk, and she said, "Oh, well, that explains the confusion. Maybe you should keep better records. Maybe you should hire competent staff. But regardless, I'm not leaving until I get my refund." I could feel my employee Jessica tense up behind me. I could see Mrs. Chen quietly gathering her things to leave because she was uncomfortable with the confrontation. And I knew I had to handle this carefully because this woman was clearly not going to accept reality. I took a deep breath and said, "Ma'am, I understand you're frustrated, but I cannot issue a refund for a product I never sold. That would be fraud. But I'm happy to help you contact Diamond Gallery since that's where you made your purchase according to your receipt." And Vivian's face went from red to purple. Her hands clenched into fists, her fake diamonds catching the light as she leaned forward, cleavage practically spilling onto my counter, and she hissed, "Are you calling me a liar? Do you know who I am? My husband is a lawyer. I sit on 3 charity boards. I know the mayor personally, and if you don't process this refund right now, I will make sure everyone in this community knows that Santos Fine Jewelry sells defective products and refuses to stand behind their merchandise." The threat hung in the air, and I felt this mix of anger and sadness because here was this woman, clearly used to bullying her way through life, clearly accustomed to people backing down when she threw around threats and status. But what she didn't understand was that I had nothing to back down from. I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't sold her anything, and I wasn't going to commit fraud just to make her go away. I said firmly but calmly, "I'm not calling you a liar. I'm simply stating facts based on your own receipt, and I'm not going to process a fraudulent refund. If you'd like to discuss this further, I suggest you contact Diamond Gallery or consult with your lawyer husband about the appropriate way to handle a return." And that's when Vivian completely lost it. She started yelling about discrimination, about small business owners being crooks, about how she'd been wronged and disrespected, her voice echoing through my small store, her hands waving so dramatically, her bangles were clanking together like wind chimes in a hurricane. And then she pulled out her phone and said, "Fine, if you won't help me, I'm calling the police and reporting you for fraud and theft." My heart sank because I knew that even though I'd done nothing wrong, having police show up at my store would look bad, might scare away customers, might damage the reputation I'd spent 15 years carefully building. But I also knew that truth and documentation were on my side, so I simply said, "Ma'am, you're welcome to call the police if you feel that's necessary. I have nothing to hide." And I watched as she actually dialed 911 and reported that a jewelry store owner was refusing to refund her for defective merchandise and was holding her property hostage. If you're feeling this story, hit that like button and share this video to support Rayan Review 2.0. Within 10 minutes, 2 police officers arrived. Not because this was an emergency, but because they were in the area and it was a slow day, and one of them was Detective James Crawford, a tall man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and sharp, observant eyes who I'd actually met before at a neighborhood business association meeting. Vivian immediately launched into her story, painting herself as the victim of a dishonest shopkeeper, showing them the necklace and claiming I'd sold it to her and was now refusing a refund. speaking rapidly and dramatically with her hands flying everywhere, her cleavage heaving with each breath, her voice dripping with fall. "Want what's fair? I just want my money back for this defective product." Detective Crawford listened patiently, took notes, and then asked to see her receipt. And when she handed it over, he looked at it for exactly 2 seconds before looking at me and saying, "Miss Santos, is this receipt from your store?" And I said, "No, Detective. That receipt is from Diamond Gallery, a different jewelry store." And I showed him one of my store's actual receipts for comparison. Completely different format, different logo, different address. Detective Crawford turned back to Vivian and said, "Ma'am, this receipt clearly shows you purchased this necklace from a different store. Why are you attempting to return it here?" And suddenly, Vivian's whole demeanor changed. The confidence evaporated. The aggressive posture deflated, and she stammered, I must have gotten confused. I shop at several jewelry stores. They all look the same. You can't expect me to remember every single purchase." And Detective Crawford said calmly, "Ma'am, you told the 911 dispatcher that this owner was committing fraud. That's a serious accusation. But it appears you're the one attempting to return merchandise to a store that never sold it to you, which could constitute return fraud." The color drained from Vivian's face, her burgundy lipstick suddenly looking garish against her pale skin, and she started backpedaling fast, saying it was all a mistake. She was sorry, she'd been confused. She had a lot on her mind. She'd just take her necklace and go to the correct store. No harm done, right? But Detective Crawford wasn't finished. He asked to see my security footage. And I took him and his partner to my back office where I pulled up the recording from 3 weeks ago, the date on Vivian's receipt. And we watched the entire day's footage on fast forward and confirmed that Vivian Ashford had never set foot in my store on that date or any date in the weeks prior. Then Detective Crawford asked if this was the first time something like this had happened, and I admitted that over the past 6 months, I'd had 3 other incidents of people trying to return jewelry with receipts from other stores, though none had been as aggressive as Vivian, and I'd always just politely turned them away. Detective Crawford's expression turned serious, and he said, "Miss Santos, I think you might be dealing with something bigger than confused customers. There's been a ring of return fraud hitting jewelry stores across the county. People buy expensive jewelry from chain stores, wear it for an event, then try to return it to small independent jewelers who they think won't check records as carefully, and when the independent store refuses, they cause a scene hoping the owner will just process the refund to avoid confrontation and negative reviews." My heart sank as I realized that I'd almost been a victim of an organized scam, that Vivian's performance wasn't just entitled behavior but calculated fraud. And when Detective Crawford went back out to the main store area where Vivian was waiting with the other officer, nervously checking her phone and probably texting her lawyer husband, he said, "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions about your recent jewelry purchases and returns." And Vivian immediately became defensive, saying she didn't have to answer anything. She wanted her lawyer. This was harassment. Detective Crawford remained calm and said, "You're not under arrest. But I'm investigating a pattern of return fraud in the area, and your attempt to return merchandise to a store that never sold it fits that pattern. So you have 2 choices. You can cooperate and answer questions, or I can get a warrant for your credit card records and we can do this the formal way." Vivian looked trapped, her eyes darting between me, the detective, the door, and finally she said in a much smaller voice, "I didn't mean any harm. I just thought, small stores sometimes don't keep good records. I thought maybe if I said I bought it here, they'd just process the return to avoid trouble. I've done it a few times, and it usually works." The admission hung in the air like a bomb, and Detective Crawford asked, "How many times have you done this?" And Vivian whispered, "Maybe 4 or 5 times. At different stores, I'd buy expensive jewelry for events, wear it once, then return it somewhere else for cash. It's not really stealing because I paid for it originally. We've had some financial difficulties. My husband lost a big client, and I needed the money, but I also needed to maintain appearances." The confession was both shocking and sad. Here was this woman who'd built her entire identity on status and appearances, who wore fake designer everything and flaunted wealth she didn't have, who was so desperate to maintain an image that she'd turned to fraud. and she genuinely didn't seem to understand that what she'd done was not only illegal, but morally wrong. Want to hear more life-changing HOA tales every week? Subscribe to Rayan Review 2.0 and never miss the next twist. Detective Crawford informed Vivian that she could be charged with attempted fraud, filing a false police report, and possibly conspiracy if she was part of a larger ring, and that he'd be contacting the other jewelry stores she'd mentioned to see if they wanted to press charges. And Vivian just stood there, her expensive facade crumbling, tears ruining her heavy makeup, her burgundy lipstick smeared, and she looked at me with this mixture of shame and desperation and said, "Please, I'll never do it again. I'm sorry. I have children. I can't have a criminal record. Please don't press charges." I looked at this woman who'd threatened me, insulted me, tried to damage my business, accused me of fraud, and demanded I commit a crime to satisfy her needs. And I felt something unexpected, not anger but pity. I saw past the fake jewelry and designer knockoffs and aggressive entitlement to someone who was deeply unhappy, deeply insecure, someone who'd made terrible choices because she was more afraid of looking poor than of being dishonest. And I thought about my own journey, about coming to this country with nothing, about building a business through honest work and integrity, about the values my mother taught me about dignity having nothing to do with designer labels or social status. I looked at Detective Crawford and said, "I don't want to press charges. I just want her to return the necklace to the store where she actually bought it, to apologize to any other businesses she's defrauded, and to understand that real value isn't about appearing wealthy. It's about being honest and treating people with respect." Detective Crawford looked surprised but nodded, saying he'd still have to file a report and that Diamond Gallery and the other stores might choose to press charges, but that my decision not to pursue charges would be noted. And then he turned to Vivian and said, "You're extremely lucky that Ms. Santos is showing you mercy you don't deserve. I suggest you take this opportunity to make things right." Starting with a genuine apology. Vivian looked at me, tears streaming down her face, mascara running, all her artificial polish literally washing away. And she said in a broken voice, "I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of this. I was wrong. I was desperate and scared, and I took it out on you. I see now how horrible that was. I'm truly sorry." I nodded and said, "I accept your apology, but I hope you understand that real wealth is measured in character, not jewelry, and that the respect you're so desperate for can't be bought or scammed. It has to be earned through how you treat others." She left the store, escorted by the police. No longer the loud, confident woman who'd marched in 2 hours earlier, but someone humbled and broken. And as I watched her walk to her car in the parking lot, her husband David pulling up to drive her home, I felt this strange mixture of relief and sadness. The next day, I received a handwritten letter from Vivian. Not typed, not formal, but written in shaky handwriting on simple stationery, apologizing again, explaining that she'd returned the necklace to Diamond Gallery, that she'd confessed to her husband about their financial situation and they were getting help, and that meeting me had been a wake-up call about the person she'd become. She wrote, "You could have destroyed me, but instead you showed me grace, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that grace." I never saw Vivian again, but about 6 months later, I was at a community charity event my mother and I sponsor every year, and I saw a woman from across the room who looked vaguely familiar. She was dressed simply in a modest dress. Her hair was a natural brown instead of dyed burgundy. She wore minimal makeup and simple jewelry, and she was volunteering at the coat check, quietly helping people and smiling genuinely. It took me a moment to recognize her as Vivian, and when our eyes met, she gave me a small nod of acknowledgement and gratitude, and I nodded back. And no words were needed because we both understood that sometimes rock bottom is where transformation begins, that sometimes the worst moment of your life becomes the catalyst for becoming a better person. My mother, who was standing beside me, asked who that woman was, and I told her the story, and my mother, who'd lived through poverty and hardship and discrimination and still maintained her faith in human goodness, smiled and said, "Mija, that's why we do what we do, not just to sell jewelry, but to remind people that true beauty comes from within, and sometimes people need to lose everything false before they can find what's real." The moral of this story isn't just about catching a scammer or standing up to entitled behavior. It's about understanding that beneath every Karen, every bully, every person lashing out, there's often someone in pain, someone scared, someone who's lost their way. And while we should never tolerate abuse or enable bad behavior, we can still choose grace over vengeance, understanding over judgment. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is give someone the chance to be better than they were. Thanks for watching Rayan Review 2.0, where every story teaches a lesson. Like, share, and subscribe for more emotional neighborhood dramas.